Imagine being a janitor, cleaning up after people who are far wealthier, more powerful, and seemingly untouchable. You've probably been in the background of some of their world-changing meetings, watching them make decisions that affect millions. But what if you were more than just invisible in that world? What if, one fateful day, a simple game of chess turned everything upside down, and suddenly, your life would never be the same again? This is the story of how an unassuming janitor, just doing his job, found himself face to face with a millionaire in a game of intellect and strategy. It all started on an ordinary Thursday morning. The millionaire, a self-made business mogul, known for his aggressive business moves, walked into the building where our janitor, Mike, had worked for years. As usual, Mike was pushing his mop across the floor, lost in his thoughts, minding his own business. But today, something unusual happened. The millionaire, who had made millions off his own ventures and had become known as a ruthless leader in the corporate world, was having a bad day. He'd just finished a big meeting, one where he didn't get exactly what he wanted, and he was in a mood. A cocky, competitive mood. In an attempt to lighten the atmosphere and entertain himself, he noticed Mike, hunched over the floor, wiping away dust. Oblivious to the world around him, a spark went off in the millionaire's head, and with a devilish grin, he approached the janitor. "Hey you, ever played chess?" The millionaire's voice cut through the silence of the empty hallway. Mike looked up, momentarily confused. He wasn't used to anyone noticing him, let alone a millionaire. Yeah, I've played a few times," Mike replied cautiously, his mop now resting against the wall. The millionaire smirked, as if he'd already won in his mind. "How about we play a game then? I'm in the mood to prove I'm the smartest guy in the room today." His tone was mocking, confident, almost as though he was daring Mike to back out. Mike was no stranger to challenges in life. His job wasn't easy, and neither was his life, but he wasn't the type to back down from anything. Chess, while not his primary interest, was something he'd learned growing up. It was a game his father had taught him when he was younger. Mike had a soft spot for strategy games, and it was something that gave him peace of mind amidst the chaos of his workday. "All right, let's play," Mike said, a hint of quiet determination in his voice. And so, the stage was set. It wasn't the glitzy corporate conference room that you might expect for such a high-stakes encounter. No, this was in the basement lounge, a room often overlooked by the high flyers in the building. A space where people like Mike spent their breaks, away from the eyes of the boardroom. The millionaire settled into one of the comfortable chairs, pulling out his smartphone to record the game. He wasn't taking Mike seriously. This will be fun, he thought to himself. Just a little game with the janitor. Nothing too serious. His fingers danced over the board, moving his pieces with arrogance. But little did he know, he was about to meet his match. Mike, on the other hand, wasn't intimidated. He sat across from the millionaire, calmly setting up his pieces. He was more focused than ever, his mind whirring with strategies and counter-moves. The first few moves were nothing extraordinary. Both players moved their pawns, testing the waters. But Mike wasn't just playing for the sake of it. He could feel the energy in the room shift, as if this was his moment. He could sense the millionaire's overconfidence, and he knew he had to capitalize on it. As the game progressed, the millionaire's moves became sloppier. His initial confidence started to fade, as he realized that Mike wasn't going to back down. What started as a playful challenge began to feel more like a battle. The millionaire wasn't used to losing. He had spent years building his empire, crushing competition, and getting what he wanted. But now, he was faced with someone who wasn't intimidated by his wealth, his status, or his reputation. Mike, on the other hand, saw this as his chance to prove something. It wasn't about the game anymore. It was about respect, about showing that even the most overlooked person can have the upper hand. Every move he made was calculated, precise, and executed with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly what you're doing. The room fell into a tense silence as the game neared its climax. The millionaire's face was flushed with frustration. He had been outplayed at every turn. Mike's strategic moves were pushing him closer and closer to the edge. And now, with a few careful steps, Mike had the millionaire cornered. His pieces were in the right places. The millionaire didn't even see it coming. And then, in one final, unexpected move, Mike checkmated the millionaire. The room was eerily still. The millionaire stared at the board, his mouth slightly agape. It was over. A janitor had just beaten a millionaire at his own game. There was a long pause before the millionaire finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't believe this. Mike sat back, his eyes steady and calm. He didn't need to say anything. The victory spoke for itself. The millionaire, still in shock, was now facing something even more shocking than his loss. He had no choice but to live up to his earlier words. "You know what? I like you," he said, the arrogance slowly draining from his voice. "You've got brains. You've got guts. I want you to come work for me." Mike, however, wasn't looking for a job. He wasn't interested in just being another employee. "What if I told you," Mike began, his voice now gaining strength, "that I could do more than just work for you? What if I could lead your company?" The millionaire laughed nervously. "Lead? You? You're a janitor. I'm the one who runs the show here." Mike's eyes met his, unwavering. "You said it yourself, didn't you? I'm smart, and I just beat you at chess. What makes you think I couldn't run the company better than you?" The millionaire was silent for a moment, his mind clearly racing, and that, my friends, is where the story gets interesting. What will happen when the janitor is offered the chance to become the CEO of a multi-million-dollar empire? Can he rise to the occasion, or will he be swallowed by the very system he's about to take control of? Stay tuned for the next part of this extraordinary story. Mike had never really dreamed of being anyone important. He was content with his life, doing his job, staying under the radar. In fact, he'd always thought that people like him, people who worked in the background, would never get the recognition they deserved. But here he was, in the middle of something bigger than he could have ever imagined. The millionaire's offer wasn't just a chance for a new job. It was a challenge, one that could change everything for both of them. The millionaire, Richard Hale, was an ambitious man. He had built his company from the ground up, starting with nothing and clawing his way into the world of high finance. He was used to being the one in control, the one who called the shots. He had trained his whole life to outthink his competitors, to strategize and predict every move. Much like in the chess games, he often played with other high-powered individuals. But Mike, this janitor with a quiet confidence, an unshakable calm, had just destroyed that worldview. Richard had spent years seeing people as either tools to be used or obstacles to be crushed. He'd never imagined that someone like Mike, someone so far beneath his social standing, could see things in a way he hadn't even considered. Now he was rattled. For the first time, Richard realized he might have met his match. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Richard said, trying to recover his composure. "You've beaten me at chess, Mike, but running a company, that's a whole different level. It's not as easy as it looks. You can't just play it like a game. There's risk, decisions that affect thousands of people, the pressure. Do you really think you can handle all that?" Mike didn't respond immediately. He had been thinking about it all night, letting the weight of the offer settle in his mind. His entire life had been about surviving, about working long hours just to make ends meet. He didn't have the fancy degree or the polished resume that people like Richard had. But what he did have was experience. He knew what it was like to deal with pressure, to juggle multiple tasks at once, to see things that others didn't. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe leading a company wasn't the same as playing chess, but in Mike's mind, it wasn't so different. Both required patience, strategy, and an understanding of how to make the right moves. "I don't think I have to tell you, Richard," Mike said finally, his voice steady. "But I've seen things. You haven't. I've watched your meetings, your decisions, and I've seen the holes in your plans. You can't keep doing business the way you have and expect things to work forever. People are starting to talk, and not in a good way." Richard blinked, the sharpness of Mike's words striking him deeper than he expected. He had always prided himself on his vision, his ability to stay ahead of the curve. But Mike was right. There were murmurs among the staff, whispers about his leadership style, about how disconnected he had become from the very people who kept the company running. Richard's business empire had grown, but with growth came more complications. He had been so focused on climbing the ladder, so focused on making deals and cutting costs, that he'd failed to notice the cracks forming beneath him. As Richard mulled over Mike's words, there was a pause, a long tense moment where neither man spoke. But this wasn't just a business decision now. It was personal. Richard knew that if Mike took over the company, it wouldn't just be a hostile takeover. It would be a reminder of Richard's own failures. His empire had been built on dominance and control. But Mike's calm, grounded nature suggested a different approach, one that Richard couldn't quite grasp. Could Mike really change things? Could he turn the company around in ways Richard never could? Richard's pride was kicking in. He had always been the one to make the calls, to build his legacy. How could he hand over the reins to someone like Mike? But at the same time, he knew he was running out of options. His empire was teetering on the edge, and he was too blinded by his ego to see it clearly. This game of chess, this one humiliating loss, had forced him to confront something he had been avoiding for a long time. His own inadequacy. "Fine," Richard said, his voice cool but reluctant. "You want to be the CEO. Prove it. I'll give you a month to show me you have what it takes. If you can turn the company around, if you can make the numbers work, then I'll step down. But if you fail, I'm taking control back, and you're gone. Deal?" Mike didn't hesitate. Deal. But as Mike walked out of the building that night, the weight of what he had just agreed to hit him full force. A month. A single month to prove he could do something no one expected. Richard had put the ball in his court, but that also meant he was on the clock. Mike knew he had no time to waste. The following days were a whirlwind. Mike dove headfirst into the company's operations, learning every department, meeting with employees, examining the financials, the marketing strategies, and most importantly, the culture within the company. He soon discovered that Richard's cutthroat approach had taken a toll on the employees. Morale was low, and many were simply going through the motions. There was no vision, no sense of unity. The company had been built on the backs of people who were now disengaged and frustrated. But Mike also saw something else, an opportunity. The company had a lot of potential, untapped resources, and ideas that had never been fully explored. With the right guidance, it could be turned into something powerful. Mike's approach was different from Richard's. While Richard had focused on profit and expansion at any cost, Mike believed in investing in people. He believed that the employees were the true backbone of the company, and that by empowering them, he could create something stronger than what Richard had built. Still, the road wasn't easy. There were countless obstacles along the way, resistant executives who didn't trust him, departments that refused to listen to his suggestions, and a mounting pressure from the investors to see immediate results. Every decision felt like it could make or break his chance at securing the CEO position. The clock was ticking, and with each passing day, the tension grew. Richard, meanwhile, watched from the sidelines. Still skeptical, he kept an eye on the numbers, waiting for any signs of failure. But deep down, there was a part of him that couldn't help but wonder, could Mike really do it? Could this janitor, this man he had underestimated, actually outsmart him and take everything he had worked for? The last week of the month was approaching, and Mike was starting to see signs of improvement. The company was beginning to function more smoothly. Employees were showing signs of renewed energy, and some of the key projects Richard had neglected were starting to get off the ground. But was it enough? Could Mike pull off the impossible, or was he about to fall short? The pressure was mounting. The stakes had never been higher. And just as the final week began, a shocking revelation surfaced, one that could change everything. The truth was finally coming to light. Was Mike truly the man to save the company? Or had Richard's empire been too far gone to repair? As the final week approached, Mike was under more pressure than ever. Every move felt like it could be his last, and the stakes were higher than he ever could have imagined. His days were filled with meetings, strategizing, and working with the employees to make changes. But the clock was ticking, and there was always the looming question in the back of his mind. Would Richard allow him to stay on as CEO? Would he be able to truly turn the company around in time? Or would he watch it all crumble? Then came the bombshell. The one thing that could destroy everything Mike had worked so hard for. The company's financial records were leaked. The numbers weren't as good as they seemed. As Mike dug deeper, he discovered something that made his stomach churn. Richard had been covering up some major financial losses, hiding debts that were threatening to sink the company. He'd used questionable tactics to keep things afloat, and now it was all coming to light. There was no way Mike could ignore this. If he didn't act fast, the whole company could collapse under the weight of these revelations. Mike's heart raced as he realized the full scope of what was happening. He had been so focused on improving the company's culture and boosting morale that he hadn't anticipated this level of deception. But now, everything was at risk. If Richard found out that Mike knew the truth, he would be out the door for sure. But if Mike kept this hidden, the company might not survive the fallout. There was no easy choice, and the weight of the decision was crushing. Mike sat in his office, staring at the leaked documents, trying to figure out what to do. He couldn't let the company fall. Not after everything he had invested in it. Not after the hope he had seen in the eyes of the employees. But how could he confront Richard with this truth? How could he do it without destroying everything? That night, Mike made a decision. He called an emergency board meeting, gathering everyone in the conference room. As the room filled with executives and staff, Mike stood at the front, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this was the moment where everything could change, and he had to take a stand. The truth had to come out. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been given the privilege of running this company for the last month, Mike began, his voice steady, despite the storm brewing inside him. But there's something I've discovered that can't be ignored. The financials are not what they seem. We've been covering up major losses, and the debts are much worse than we were led to believe. The room went silent. The executives exchanged nervous glances, but no one dared to speak. Mike continued, I know this is hard to hear, but I've made the decision to confront Richard with this. We need to fix this now, before it's too late. Richard, who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room, stood up with an air of disbelief. You can't be serious, Mike. You have no idea what you're talking about. These numbers, they're just temporary setbacks. Nothing to worry about. But Mike wasn't backing down. The truth is out, Richard. We need to face it together. The company can't survive if we keep pretending everything is fine. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm asking for the chance to fix it. There was a moment of stunned silence. Richard's face reddened, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Fear? Regret? It was hard to say, but then, slowly, he sat back down. His empire, the one he had spent his entire life building, was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. The truth was undeniable. The board members, once silent and passive, began to speak up. They voiced their support for Mike, acknowledging the changes he had made in the company and the vision he had brought. Some had been skeptical at first, but now they saw the truth in Mike's words. For the first time in years, the company had a chance to recover, to rebuild from the ground up. Mike took a deep breath and continued. We're going to start fresh. We'll restructure the company, address the debts, and begin rebuilding trust with our employees. But we need transparency, we need honesty, and we need to move forward together. Richard's face was a mix of anger and defeat, but he didn't argue. In that moment, he knew that Mike had already won. He could see the support in the room, the determination in Mike's eyes. Richard had been the one who built this empire, but Mike was the one who was going to save it. The next few weeks were intense. The company was in crisis mode, but Mike's steady leadership helped guide it through the storm. He worked tirelessly with the board, the employees, and the investors to clean up the mess Richard had left behind. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when it seemed like they might not make it. But with every challenge, Mike's resolve grew stronger. He was no longer just the janitor. He was the leader, and he had earned the trust of everyone around him. In the end, Mike succeeded. The company not only survived, but began to thrive again. The debts were cleared, and a new strategy was put in place to ensure long-term success. Richard, realizing he had no place in this new vision, stepped aside and allowed Mike to take over fully as CEO. As Mike sat in the CEO's office on his first official day, looking out over the city skyline, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. He had never imagined that a game of chess would change his life, but it had. It had taught him something important, that anyone, no matter their background, could rise above the odds and make a difference. The world might try to put people in boxes, but Mike had proven that it's not the title that defines a person. It's the actions they take, the risks they're willing to face, and the courage to stand up for what's right. Mike had become more than a janitor. He had become the leader of a company, and he had changed everything, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. The chessboard had been just the beginning.